Today, we are going way, way back to talk about what might just be the single most important argument in the history of Western thought. It wasn't about winning a war or founding an empire. Nope. It was a debate between a teacher and his student about what reality is actually made of. And believe it or not, it all kicked off with a simple question about water.
So let me ask you this. What if everything we know about science, about philosophy, about, well, reality itself, started right here? Not in some grand palace, but in a noisy port city with an argument that seems so simple on the surface, but whose conclusion would literally shape the world for thousands of years to come.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in a city called Miletus, around 600 BCE. You gotta picture this place. It was like the Silicon Valley of the ancient world. A super wealthy, bustling hub of trade, and more importantly, a melting pot of new ideas. For the very first time, people were starting to say, hey, maybe the world isn't run by Zeus throwing lightning bolts. They wanted rational explanations. And right in the middle of all this, we meet our two main characters, a brilliant teacher and his even more brilliant student.
So on one side, you've got Thales. Think of him as the engineer. He's a hands-on, practical guy who trusts what he can see and touch. He looks at the docks, he sees the ships, he sees the river, and he's always asking a very practical question: what works? But then you have his student, Anaximander. He's the map maker. He's not just looking at the docks. He's trying to imagine the entire world, even the parts he can't see. He relies on pure logic and asks a much, much bigger question. What explains everything?
All right, so let's get into the first move in this intellectual chess match. Thales, the engineer, steps up with a theory that, for its time, was absolutely revolutionary. He was on a quest to find the one single substance that everything else is made of. The Greeks had a word for this: the arche, the beginning, the source code of reality. And for Thales, the answer was obvious. I mean, the evidence was everywhere he looked. Rain falls and plants grow. The Nile River floods, and suddenly there's life everywhere. He even thought the entire Earth was just floating on a giant ocean. And the real kicker? Water could change its form. It could be a liquid, a gas, like mist, or a solid, like ice. From his very practical, what you see is what you get perspective, water was the perfect candidate for the arche. It all just made sense.
But this is where the story takes a fascinating turn, because his student, Anaximander, doesn't just disagree. He takes the very tool his master taught him, logic, and uses it to completely pick apart his teacher's argument. This, right here, is the first dialectic ever recorded. It's the birth of a new way of finding truth, not through myths, but by pitting ideas against each other in a battle of pure reason.
And this whole revolution starts with a devastatingly simple question. You can just picture the scene, right? Thales, the respected master, has just laid out his beautiful, elegant theory. And then his young student quietly asks, "But teacher, what about fire?"
And boom, Anaximander points out the fatal flaw. Water and fire are opposites. They're mortal enemies. They literally destroy each other. His logic was airtight. If the infinite, fundamental source of absolutely everything was water, well, it would have put out all the fire in the universe a long, long time ago. The simple fact that fire even exists proves the source can't be water. It has to be something neutral, something that isn't on team wet or team dry.
Now, this is such a huge moment. And Anaximander doesn't just stop at finding a problem. He builds something entirely new and mind-bending in its place. He takes this incredible intellectual leap away from the world we can see and touch and into a hidden reality that you can only get to with pure logic.
So what's his solution? He calls it the apeiron. It means something like the indefinite or the unlimited. Now, this isn't a substance you can just scoop up from the harbor. It's a purely abstract concept. Imagine a giant, invisible cosmic reservoir that is the source of everything, but it itself is nothing in particular. It's not hot or cold, not wet or dry. It's totally neutral. All the opposites we see in our world, like hot and cold, they emerge from the apeiron, and eventually they have to return to it. He had basically invented a reality beyond our senses.
And the consequences of this one idea, the apeiron, they were just staggering. This wasn't just about water and fire anymore. This single debate laid the very foundations for Western science and philosophy. It introduced a whole new way of thinking about the cosmos.
Anaximander's idea basically gave us three game-changing concepts. First, rationalism, the radical idea that you can discover deep truths about the universe using logic alone, without ever seeing them.
Second, it's basically the first crack at the law of conservation of energy, the idea that things don't just appear from nothing, they emerge from a source and have to return to it. And third, and this is wild, he proposed this idea of cosmic justice. He saw the universe as being in a constant state of balance. The heat of summer, for example, is like an injustice against the cold, and it must eventually pay back that debt when winter comes.
And this, right here, is the ultimate game changer. This argument shifted humanity's entire focus. We stopped looking for a fundamental thing, like water, and started searching for a fundamental system. The universe wasn't just a pile of stuff anymore. It was a network of invisible laws, a system of checks and balances that we could actually understand with our minds. That is the bedrock of all modern science.
This story was so profound, so fundamental, that thousands of years later, another brilliant philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, looked all the way back to this exact moment. He saw Anaximander as more than just a thinker. He saw him as a kind of tragic hero.
So Nietzsche called Anaximander the first tragic philosopher. Now, why tragic? Because Anaximander was the first person to truly grasp a hard truth about reality, that for anything to exist, it has to do so at the expense of its opposite. For summer to be hot, it commits an injustice against the cold, and for that crime of existing, it must eventually pay the penalty and die, returning to the apeiron. Nietzsche thought this was an incredibly honest and brave way of looking at the universe, as this constant, tragic, but necessary balancing act.
And that leaves us with a pretty heavy question, doesn't it? Anaximander's ancient idea of cosmic justice, that for something to come into being, something else has to be pushed back or consumed, well, it feels more relevant today than ever. It really forces us to ask, for our way of life, for our society, for our technology, for our very existence, what's the penalty we're racking up, and who or what is paying the price?